Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my fantabulous co-host, Adam Frommel. We are going to continue plowing through our NBA team look-aheads. The Los Angeles Clippers have landed on our desk next. We have brought on Sabrina Merchant, hoops aficionado for SB Nation, covers all of basketball there, as well as the Clippers specifically, but talks about hoops at large, WNBA. She has covered NBA at large, also the Lakers too. She's the co-host of the Step Through podcast as well. Go check that out on YouTube. It's a great watch/listen. Caught a few of their episodes, and they've done a great job covering the NBA, WNBA there too. So had a great conversation with her as usual. She's a recurring guest, no stranger around these parts. Before we dive in, just the usual reminders, please, the usual begging, however you want to frame it. Please rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Even if you do not use iTunes, though, so long as you have access to it, we ask that you head over there, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us a 5-star rating, and write a review. You can criticize the hell out of me in the review. Don't criticize Adam, because I'll come at you with these virtual hands. What are the kids saying now? I have no idea. Seriously, though, you could constructive criticism. We take it into account. If you don't like our takes, happy to have a dialogue. We'll read it. But throw us that 5-star rating. Helps us out a ton. If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast because you're a diehard Clippers fan or you're a diehard Sabrina Merchant fan, wouldn't fault you there. That's a great idea. Or you've just happened upon us accidentally, consider throwing us that permanent subscription wherever you get your podcast and downloading every episode. We are pleasantly sub-mediocre, as I like to remind our incumbent listeners before every team look ahead. With all of that now out of the way, though, let's get to the Los Angeles Clippers, their immediate trajectory, their long-term outlook with SB Nations and the step-throughs, Sabrina Merchant. Sabrina, thank you so much for coming back on the Hardwood Knocks podcast to talk with me about the Clippers. First and foremost, though, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. NBA season is upon us. WNBA playoffs are right here. It's a very good time to be a basketball fan.
Yeah, there's a lot to watch right now. The WNBA playoffs are far more entertaining than I'm already at the point where I can't deal with NBA training camp coverage. NBA training camp and preseason, it just exhausts me. I just can't bring my media days fine. And there's obviously other stuff going on this year, but I can't deal with this is what they're running in practice. And then NBA preseason, I barely can watch anymore. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's like suffering through something for me.
I'm just generally happy to see these teams in action for the first time. And when you get healthy players, I'm willing to watch. So even if it's preseason, let's do it.
You're a far more positive person than I am. So kudos to you. Let's start with Kawhi. I found his media day comments uncharacteristically candid when he was talking about why he signed a long-term deal. I was like, Kawhi said that. And I know it seems like the new thing might be sign the 3+1 and then just extend after 2 years. But the fact that he said that he signed the 3+1 so that he would give himself the option of returning this year, should we now expect him to return this year, or should the expectation still be Kawhi's not playing this season?
I would say the expectation is still for him not to return, but it's nice that he left the door open for the possibility of a return. And then, like you said, the whole short-term deal appears to be going out of vogue a little bit. You can always just sign a longer deal and then demand a trade or sign an extension. And there's a lot of flexibility within the long-term deals just based on this star empowerment that probably didn't exist before. So yeah, maybe he thought that a 1-and-1 plus another 5-year extension was the best way of optimizing the money, but he can just tack on a 4-year extension 2 years into this deal and he'll be just rolling in it, right? So I think he's fine either way.
And then if he wants to trade, as Ben Simmons is proving, he can try and demand one with 4 years left on his contract. So
exactly.
And do you think it helps, though? So he did say that he'll be there for the long term unless something catastrophic happens, basically. But having him sort of on a longer term deal where you can, as a team, have him under control for at least 3 years, do you think that helps them sort of move forward where maybe they're more inclined to take risks or bigger swings if they arise, or just easier to flesh out a vision for this team because you don't have the specter of an imminent Kawhi Leonard free agency looming over you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we saw this in Cleveland where like just the consistent LeBron James free agency every summer made it just put a lot of pressure on the Cavaliers front office to constantly do things that may not have been the best idea in their long-term interest. But having not only Kawhi locked in for these 3+1, Paul George is on a 4-year extension. Marcus Morris is on, 3 years left of his contract. They just signed their slate of rookies to 3-year deals. Luke Kennard is on a 4-year deal. Like basically, and then I guess the only notable free agent coming up is Terance Mann. But like everybody who's super important to this team is on multi-year deals at the moment. So there isn't a lot of like urgency to do something stupid in the moment just to like appease Kawhi. Like, I mean, to that, I point you to the Rajon Rondo trade from a year ago because Kawhi Leonard said they needed a playmaker and someone with smarter basketball IQ, and it didn't quite work out. So there's less pressure to do something in the moment. They can evaluate their options more thoroughly. And I just think it's a more comfortable situation for everyone around, that like there isn't this specter of free agency floating over everyone that like the media is talking about, because that is something that Kawhi Leonard mentioned in his supremely transparent press conference, was that he didn't want to create another storyline for the media to talk about if he were to become a free agent. So I think it's just better business for everyone that he's stuck. Everybody else is firmly planted their roots in Los Angeles, and it's just one less thing to talk about.
Still floored by the transparency he showed in that answer. The logic totally makes sense on his part, but still floored by it. What did you think of the Eric Bledsoe trade for this team? He's obviously not Sterling Brown, since I'm obligated to mention Sterling Brown in every single
not
podcast.
DeLon Wright either. Yeah,
not DeLon Wright either. But what did you think about that trade for them?
I thought it was an admission that they were just never certain about Patrick Beverley's health during the regular season, and just even during the postseason, as was demonstrated during the 2020 bubble when he was unavailable for the first round of the playoffs. I also think, so this is something that like I've never actually gotten like confirmed, but it does appear to me that they just tried to completely flesh out everyone who existed before Kawhi Leonard and Paul George arrived. And at this point, the longest tenured Clipper is Ivica Zubac. He is the only one who predates Kawhi and Paul George. And that was like by 3 months, of trade deadline before the other two got there.
What a great trade by the Lakers that ended up being, right?
I don't know. Just Mike Muscala, Laker legend, right? Anyway, so I think Michael Beasley was involved in there too. It's the whole thing. But it definitely seems like there was a concerted effort to shift the culture, once Kawhi and PG got there, and reframe the entire organization in their image. And that meant clearing out everybody who was there before them. And there was obviously a really uneasy marriage between the old and the new guards in 2019-20 when those two superstars came in. And the Clippers' answer to that was, okay, let's just, get rid of the old guard entirely. And it's tricky to do with a guy like Patrick Beverley, who fit better with Kawhi and PG than the rest of the other guys, like Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, notably. But when, he's coming off a season when he missed a substantial amount of time again, because of just repeated injuries, and he ended the season on a kind of sour note by pushing Chris Paul in the back and getting suspended to start the regular season. Like, makes it a little bit easier to wash that away when you're dealing with that part of Patrick Beverley. I'm not convinced that Eric Bledsoe is a better player than Pat Bev on either end of the floor, really. But I do know that he is substantially more durable. You can count on him to play 75 plus games during the regular season. And as far as an 82 game player, he showed in Milwaukee that he is capable of being a really productive player during those regular season minutes. I mean, there was one season where I thought he was like pushing all-star consideration and just gave it to Chris Middleton because, reputation, whatever. But the Clippers are more of a regular season team this year, right? Like without Kawhi Leonard, their playoff upside is far more limited. So it's almost a signal that like, hey, the regular season is really important to us. We need somebody who's going to be around to play all of these games. Like they don't really have another point guard on the roster. So I think it was just more of an admission of durability because, Bledsoe can't shoot. That's really important for a Ty Lue team. Maybe they think that his shooting will take a step up because of all of the space that is afforded within this offense, like that did not exist in New Orleans or Milwaukee. I hesitate to even use any of his New Orleans experience because he was just so not interested in that situation from the moment he got there. I think about that
so
quote.
bad defensively for them too.
Right. I think about
was
that
the
quote of
shock.
like when he fouled New York when they were up 3 and was just like, yeah, I wasn't listening during the timeout. I totally spaced on the time and score situation. It's like, well, that's not going to fly with the Clippers. But I assume that he's going to be more invested in the situation from the get-go. You know, he's an OG Clipper. He's got a lot of friends on the team. Him and Marcus Morris were just lovingly talking about each other after having played together in Phoenix back in the day. So yeah, I just think it's like they need a guy who's going to be there. They trust their player development to fix players' jump shots. Like they had 6 rotation players shoot 40% or more from 3-point range last year.
Somehow.
And
I thought it
that's
was like
not
80
even
rotation players.
So that's 6 rotation players plus Rondo and Boogie, who I'm not counting as rotation players.
Okay.
And then Kawhi and Pat Bev were like 39.7 and 39.8. So that's the situation from their 3-point percentage. I think they have a lot of faith that Bledsoe's numbers will go up in that system. And then defensively, like, I think he's about as good as Pat Bev. I mean, Pat obviously has a sterling reputation of being Mr. 94 feet, getting people's faces. I thought he was tremendous on Devin Booker in that Western Conference Finals. I thought he was pretty good on Donovan Mitchell as well in the series before that. But the consistency, you know, is just not always there with Pat. And I think you get more of that with Bledsoe. So that's my very long-winded answer of saying, like, they needed to get rid of Pat. They got a pretty suitable replacement who should be healthy for the majority of the season, knock on wood.
And maybe with more space, he'll be like, he was a very efficient driver at points in Milwaukee. And so just to have more room in LA, I'm sure will help him. It does sound like he's going to start, though, over Mann or Batum. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that. I know it doesn't necessarily matter who starts, but it does sort of affect like how they stagger minutes because they don't have then like a true, and Eric Bledsoe's not a true point guard, but like they don't have any semblance of a floor general coming off the bench then for them.
Right. And this has been just like a time-honored tradition for us talking about the Clippers, right? Is who is their point guard, who's handling lead ball handler duties. And it's something that's just been in the zeitgeist about the Clippers for the last 3 years or so. Ty Lue said that he was going to start alongside Reggie Jackson, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and Zubac. Ty has done a very good job of staggering Kawhi and Paul George, you know, when the two of them were playing together. And so I imagine he's going to do an equally good job of staggering those lead ball handlers of like Eric, Reggie Jackson, and Paul George, making sure that 1 or 2 of them is on the court at all times. So I think the fact that they're starting doesn't mean that like, oh, hey, Luke Kennard is our backup point guard and he's going to have all of the responsibilities in the second unit. Pretty sure, you know, some of those guys are going to be on the court for the entire 48 minutes. I think part of him starting is 1, to like maintain that defensive integrity. 2, we mentioned that he did not seem supremely invested in New Orleans. A good way to get a guy to buy in, make him a starter, right?
That's a good point.
And Lou famously like had these 10-game shifts last season where he would reevaluate his rotation. I would assume that this one is going to get like a 10-game shift, right? I don't think that this is going to be the starting lineup for the remainder of the season. You mentioned Batum, you mentioned Terance Mann, both of whom have really interesting cases to start. I don't think that this is like the starting lineup we should pencil in for game 81 of the regular season, but I would expect it to get like those first 10-game look.
Whenever I'm doing these look ahead outlines, I always have to go back because I realize I never ask anything about the star players because I just don't have like strong thoughts on them. So you can probably tell this was a throw-in Paul George topic when you looked at it. Kawhi's going to be out for, let's say, most of the year. Paul George's MVP odds are 36-1 at the moment. Is that something that should interest people? Is it what needs to happen with him? Or is this if the Clippers are just better than expected without Kawhi, he might organically have that, we'll call it the narrative nudge to enter that conversation?
So MVPs usually come from top 3 seeds, right? We're basically looking at Russell Westbrook as the lone exception in the last 15, 20 years. And that was because he averaged a triple-double back before it was cool, I guess. So I think your hope of Paul George being an MVP relies on the Clippers finishing pretty high in the standings. And as much as I like the pieces on this team, I don't think that's going to happen. I know that the West is got a lot more parity and probably a lot less top-end talent than in years past. Like, you could tell me that the Clippers were better than the Mavericks and the Nuggets and the Blazers in the regular season. I wouldn't bat an eye, but if they fell behind all 3 of them, I also don't think that's unreasonable either. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there's kind of a top 3 of like that Phoenix, Utah, Lakers trio, especially during the regular season, you know, when Utah is so deep and has just figured it out. So it's hard for me to see the Clippers jumping high enough into the standings for Paul George to get that MVP buzz. But as for George himself, I just think his efficiency is going to take something of a hit playing without Kawhi Leonard. It's Paul George just has the smoothest looking jump shot in the world, and when it's flowing, he looks unguardable. He looks just like a diet version of Kevin Durant. And obviously that's just not the case on a regular basis. You see it during the playoffs when he has just these wild swings of shooting, above 50% and then below 25% on occasion. You never know which version of Paul George you're going to get on any given day. So I think that efficiency, that consistency is going to be hard to maintain over the course of 82 games, especially if the Clippers lean with these more defensive lineups like Zubac starting at center. During the conference finals, I thought Paul George had a really hard time scoring against Phoenix, and it wasn't because Phoenix was doing a good job of guarding him. It was just he had a hard time getting his drive game going with Zubac camped out in the dunker spot. So I guess it depends how much the Clippers play big versus small, to see how well Paul George is able to function offensively. I just think that his numbers aren't going to look as spectacular as you would want from an MVP candidate, even though I could see him having a really valuable second team all NBA season. I'm just not sure that translates to MVP discussion.
To your point, his usage jumped by 8% without Kawhi last year, and his effective field goal percentage dropped by 3.5 points. And it'll probably just get tougher this year if Eric Bledsoe is playing a lot of the minutes that Patrick Beverley and better 3-point shooters were logging last year.
No team can afford to overpay for talent. Build a championship team with Indeed the smart way by only paying for quality candidates that meet your must-have requirements. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. When hiring gets hard, you need Indeed, the job site that makes hiring incredibly simple. Just attract, interview, and hire. In fact, with Indeed, you can do all of your hiring in one place, even interviewing. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Indeed knows how important it is to make the most of your recruiting hours and dollars. With Indeed, you can save time and money by setting your must-have qualifications and only paying for the quality candidates that meet them. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer valid through October 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
I could not believe that Nick Batum signed for the deal that he did. They ended up paying Justise Winslow more, which is wild. Even Reggie Jackson's deal was just I thought he might get a longer deal. Who are you more confident in sort of repeating the season that they had last year between Jackson and Batum?
Definitely Reggie. His shooting has been just really good ever since he got to the Clippers. Even when he was, objectively terrible on defense and passing and all sorts of other parts of his decision making when he first got to the Clippers, his shot looks really good. And I think that's sustainable. He's just capable of launching from wherever. And, the Clipper fans affectionately call him Big Government because he's always bailing them out late in the shot clock. So he's got the goggles back, for this season, even though he proclaims to have 2010 vision and no need for corrective eyewear, but it's just part of the look of Reggie Jackson now.
I respect that.
Yeah, I think him being in that secondary option role is just a good fit for him because, the best perimeter defender goes on Paul George, and then he's able to work off of, the second side action. He's just, I think, in a more sustainable position. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't continue to shoot 40% on threes when he's shown that track record for the last 2 years. I don't think that he's going to shoot as well on floaters as he did during the postseason, but I think the jump shot is here to stay. And that's such a big part of Reggie Jackson's game that it feels more sustainable, and he's going to be starting. So he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to be able to develop a rhythm. All of that seems very plausible. Nick Batum is not going to be starting, first of all. So the total minute thing is probably going to be harder to replicate. Then again,
I think my favorite stat from last year was that Nick of just the entire league was that Nick Batum led the Clippers in total minutes played.
He wasn't projected to start last year either, and then had to because Marcus Morris wasn't ready to go at the start of the season. So, he will be that guy who has to step in if there's any sort of injury within the starting five. I just think that Nick Batum is one of those guys who amplifies better players, and it's going to be hard for him to go as hard as he did during the playoffs for a full 82 game season.
Mhm.
Like, I thought Nick was great when he was starting, for that first part of the season up until I think March 15th, which is when they made the switch to Morris and Zubac in the 4-5. He just doesn't look quite as good when he's playing next to like the Luke Kennards and like Patrick Pattersons of the world. He is very much like a ceiling raiser, not a floor raiser. So I think having him in more second units is just going to make him look a little bit less impressive, even though he's not doing anything materially differently in his game. And I also think the Clippers are just going to make it a point to load manage him because, like you said, he did lead the Clippers in minutes last year. He was a huge part of their postseason rotation. He was guarding Rudy Gobert for the majority of that Utah Jazz series. He played the entirety of the Olympics. So I think he was the leader on the French national team in minutes as well. So It's been a lot of basketball for one Nick Batum. And I think that they're just a little concerned about overextending him again. So for the regular season, at least, I would imagine they give him a less intensive role.
Yeah, I think I agree with your pick also just because his season last year just came so far out of left field after what happened in Charlotte. Like he was defending 4 positions consistently and as you mentioned, like was on some bigs and he might now, the way the roster said, like, is he the best passer on this team too? Like
I think so.
That's just wild to say, but I would have more confidence in Reggie Jackson as well. I think I asked you this last time. I'm going to run it back here. Is Terance Mann considered a core piece of this team? And do you think he has it in him to be better defensively than he was last season?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely a core piece. For one, they're just so proud of him as like this second round success story. The Clippers don't have a lot of draft wins to point to in recent years. So just from a pride, like sort of ego perspective, I think the fact that Terance Mann has popped is really just a good feeling for them, which, never doubt the ego in terms of running these teams. And then he was just so important in terms of the playoffs, right? Like he steps in for Kawhi Leonard in the starting lineup, puts up 39 points in game 6 of the conference semis to help the Clippers advance to the first conference finals in franchise history. Like those moments just, you can't script them better than that. But I think you're absolutely right to point to the defensive side of the ball because for all of the gains that Terance made offensively last year, like he shot over 40% from 3-point line. What do you do? Everybody on the Clippers did. Still wasn't really being guarded there. Like you saw a lot of instances of him driving off of closeouts because like he just had so much room to work with when defenders were trying to cover that space. I think he just needs to be stronger at defending the ball. And I see no reason why he can't be because he has all of those physical tools, right? Like he's a big wing. He's about 6'6". He's got good size, good length. He's not the most laterally quick, but like it shouldn't be in a situation where he's getting beaten off the dribble by his opponent. So I think that is really the side of the ball that they're going to be focusing on more. He even talked about that today at training camp. So, lovely thing to pick on. The Clippers, I imagine, will be running more like conventional pick and roll defenses during the start of the season. They'll be going a lot less small over the course of the regular season. So he'll have to figure out how to defend in a non-switching system. And I don't really see a reason why he can't figure out those tendencies. It's not like he ever looks lost. He just gives a little bit more effort on offense than he does on defense. Like he's a tremendous offensive rebounder, not so much a defensive rebounder. But that's just the kind of thing I think that young players pick up on, right? This is only year 3 for him in the league. And I would expect if he's going to take another jump, it would come on that side of the ball.
Have they given any updates on how close Serge Ibaka is to returning from his back injury?
Yeah, so he is doing non-contact drills during training camp. They expect to progress to 5-on-5 pretty quickly for him. So I think the expectation is for him to be ready, if not at the start of the regular season, then pretty close to it. I know they have this third center battle going on in training camp, like Harry Giles and Isaiah Hartenstein are both there. The plan is for Serge Ibaka to take that role sooner than later, to be the backup center. So it's not the kind of thing where we just don't know when he's coming back. It should be like by November, I think.
Do you view Hartenstein or Giles as the better fit for this team?
I mean, Harry Giles has just been bad for most of his NBA career. Like there's just no sugarcoating it. I love Harry Giles. I went to Duke. I have very fond memories of Harry Giles in the ACC tournament, but it's never really clicked for him in the NBA. And I think out of a center, the thing that you want most is defensively, and Giles has just really been a train wreck on that end of the floor for his entire NBA career. So, I mean, I don't really think it matters if they put in Giles or Hartenstein. Like, if that's the deciding factor, if the Clippers make the plan or not, then like something else has gone wrong in this NBA season. But I think Hartenstein is probably the better player. Like, he can actually shoot from distance, and he has some idea of what's going on defensively. So that's where I would lean, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal.
There's some nice passes in Cleveland last year too, and I was a little bit surprised that he only got like a non-guaranteed deal this summer. But the big man market is always like unreadable to me. So I guess when you sort of look at their center rotation though, so you have Zubac, you have Ibaka, but then like if your third big is Hartenstein or if it's Giles or if Ibaka misses time, it does feel like their lineup is still catered towards at times playing without true bigs. And last year, per Clean the Glass, they played about 530 possession without a big on the floor. Would you expect that number to be higher or lower this coming season?
All right, so 530 possessions. Like, any idea like what percentage of the Clippers possessions that is? I'm having a hard time figuring out what that means.
I mean, that's a fair question. I can probably look at that very quickly. Let's see. So their total possessions last season that are in CTG as it loads, and I'm just reading it talking very slowly in hopes that it loads quickly enough. They played 6,600 possessions.
Okay,
so it's not like this huge,
less than
like
10%. Okay,
yeah,
less than 10%. All right. Yeah, I think that would go up a little bit just because they don't have like a DeMarcus Cousins to soak up those big minutes. I think even Patrick Patterson probably counts as a big in those situations.
I did filter him out, so yes.
Okay, yeah. So if Morris or Batum or Justise Winslow has to play the 5 in those situations, I think that'll end up being a more common outcome for the Clippers this year than last. If only because we saw during the playoffs how successful they are playing small lineups. They didn't really have an opportunity to do at the start of the regular season because they had so many injuries in their backcourt to start the year, right? Like, you can't play small if your wings are not healthy. But with, more man and just fewer bigs, I think it's a natural outcome. I don't think they're like looking to do it beyond crunch time at the start of the year. Like, Marcus Morris had said that he is fine playing the 5, but he expects that that'll be a card that they hold until the postseason, not just putting it out there all the time unless it's like within the last 5 minutes of the game. So admittedly, if Ibaka is hurt or the third center thing doesn't work out and they end up using that roster spot on like Amir Coffey or something, then yeah, they're just going to have to play without a big for more often. But I still think that they would prefer to use a true center during most of their regular season lineups.
I think it probably helps that a lot of people, for some reason, consider Zubac like this defensive liability, and I don't think he's in certain matchups, sure, but he's really just not. Like, you watch him and he's fine. Is he better defensively than Serge Ibaka at this point?
I think so.
Like, yeah. So
better rim protector. I think he can even switch a little bit. Admittedly, the Luka matchup was very bad for him.
Right now might be the best way to put it. Yeah. With Kawhi out, or maybe even if Kawhi was healthy, do you expect Justise Winslow to get a chance to play a role with this team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
it feels like it's been 3.5 years since I've seen like Winslow play any meaningfully impactful basketball, by the way. I don't know how long it's actually been, but it feels like
I'm going to say the last game that I watched of Justise Winslow was December of 2018 when they come to play the Clippers in LA, and they had to Miami only had 8 healthy players, so Justise literally played point guard, and they had to zone for the entire game because they didn't have enough healthy bodies to play man to man, and they ended up blowing the Clippers out of the building, which was a very strange night. I think he's really part of that top 9, top 10, depending on Ibaka's health. He has said that they're basically using him in every single position on the court, whether that's backup 1 all the way to backup 5. Which makes sense because he's not a shooter. So really, in the Ty Lue offense, like, center is the only spot he can function offensively. But defensively, he is probably capable of guarding every position on the floor, unless it's like a true back to the basket post-up center, which you're not really going to encounter in most second units. I think that he'll probably just fill in wherever is needed. I imagine they think of him as like a real transition weapon where he can rebound the ball and bring the ball up on his own and set up the offense a bit faster than the Clippers are wanted to do. And just because of like the general lack of front court depth, I think he'll have to be used there in some capacity, because I'd rather have Justise Winslow play center than Harry Giles at this point, regardless of how bad Justice's offense has been. And it's been really, really bad. If only because like you have a little bit more confidence in what he can bring defensively.
Okay, there was that one season he shot okay from three without ever dribbling and having all the space in the world to take those shots. That's what you need to point to.
And, he'll have a lot of space on this team too.
I don't know if they play him and Eric Bledsoe together at any point, that might test their 3-point expertise from last season. It doesn't sound like from some of the comments I saw that Jason Preston is going to be healthy at all this year. Looking at the Clippers rookies, like, do you have any thoughts, impressions of those guys? And is there a chance that this is weird, because I would normally say there's no chance in hell that either of those guys get minutes with the big league club. But like with Kawhi out, I know the Clippers don't have their own draft pick. There is the potential for like them not to be great. And so do they kind of focus on trying to give those guys some, NBA reps, or do you expect them to be very much like just out of sight, out of mind?
So I would say that the Clippers have like 10 solid NBA rotation players at this point, plus 3 rookies and then Kawhi. So it's hard to get through 82 games only playing 10 players, right? You need a little bit more depth than that. Even if on a given night you're only playing a 10-man rotation, just if Paul has to sit or Marcus has to sit or Batum has to sit, like someone is going to have to step in for them. And maybe that's the Giles Hartenstein spot, but I would imagine that the rookies are going to get a look. For Brandon, Boston, they're just very happy with his offense at this point. He's super comfortable getting to his spot, scoring defensively. Train wreck. And that's to be expected for a rookie who like was not even good in college. So I think it's going to be harder for him to get on the court because they have such little faith in him defensively. So he seems more like an Agua Caliente Clippers candidate to me, where he'll have to figure out how to play, in the G League first. Keon, I think, has a little bit more of an idea of what to do defensively. He's just so raw. Like his physical tools absolutely overwhelm you, and he can jump out of the gym, but he's just not polished enough in like any aspect of his game so far. And I wonder if like they feel more comfortable going with Boston just because like, oh, maybe we can just hide him on defense if we're not switching and like actually trust him to handle the ball on offense. Whereas with Keon, I'm not sure that he has one skill anywhere on the court that you can point to and be like, yeah, this is NBA ready. So I think they will get some minutes, if only because, like I said, the Clippers don't exactly have a ton of depth, even if like the depth has good quality. But I wouldn't like pencil any of them in for a rotation role on like every night. I thought Preston had the best chance of that. And like you mentioned, it's not looking great for his injury prognosis at the moment.
This might inform how Luke Kennard was viewed last year in the Clippers. I'm only asking about him after the rookies. I do assume, though, that based on them starting all 3 of like their best ball handlers at this point, that Luke Kennard will probably have a bigger, or should we say at least more consistent role with this team going into the season.
Yeah, I think you can sort of analogize him to the way Lou Williams was used by Ty Lue last year, in that he's not closing games. There's a big difference between how Lou was used in the Ty Lue system versus the Doc Rivers system. So he's sort of like the first guard off the bench, manages a second unit, but like also playing next to another guy who has the ball in his hands a lot, like Lou was playing with Paul George a lot. And I could see, Luke having to play next to Reggie or Paul George a lot as well in the second unit. But they have a lot invested in him, right? They gave him a 4-year extension before he even stepped on the court as a Clipper. Granted, 4th year of that is a team option, and the money is not nearly as much as was originally reported by his delightful agents at CAA. So it's not as burdensome of a contract as one might seem, but it's still a 4-year commitment, and they want him to be good. I bring this up a lot. Like the 3rd game of the season, Kawhi has just been smacked in the face by Serge Ibaka. He's out with the stitches. They're playing a game against Dallas, and Ty Lue starts Luke Kennard, and he says, yeah, Luke's going to be the guy I'd go to when Kawhi or PG has to sit. And that lasted for all of 3 weeks. Like it just didn't happen beyond that. That was the plan. He wanted Kennard to be in that position, and it just didn't work out. So they like him quite a bit. Like offensively, if you watch him on a good day, it's so pretty, right? Like he has a really good command of the court. He's got that pretty little lefty finish around the rim. He can shoot from wherever. He's delightful shooter. He can work out of THOs, pick and roll. Like, he's got the complete offensive skill set. It's just he doesn't have the confidence in his game at this point, especially playing on a good team like the Clippers, as opposed to the first 3 years of his career that he languished in Detroit. So it's funny, Ty Lue actually just mentioned today that like they have a number of sets in the half court that are designed to get the ball to Luke. Like they call them the Hunt Luke package. And
Wow.
He said, like, I had to take him out of the court on a scrimmage because he had an open shot. He didn't take it. So like, this is what they're expecting from Luke Kennard. Like they are going to make him a priority in their second unit offense, but he has to be ready for it. And evidently there's a short leash. So
Could there be like a baptism by fire thought to that then, where it's like, hey, we're going to start Eric Bledsoe, Paul George, and Reggie Jackson to where, yeah, stagger. I know starting doesn't matter, but like now Luke Kennard has to come off the bench. Like maybe it forces him. He'll be playing at least certain stretches with as few secondary ball handlers or primary ball handlers as possible. That maybe it forces him to be more aggressive.
I mean, one would hope. I think Luke always tends to look more comfortable the longer he has the ball in his hands, and they want him to make quick decisions, but I think he just needs more minutes. So if he can get like extended stretches with the second unit and, like you said, being more of that lead guard with that group, I can only imagine it would help. I just can't see him being worse than last year. And even last year, like he was an effective offensive player. So.
What is, and I'm sure we already talked about this, but what do you view as the single biggest weakness of this team?
So we kind of mentioned it, just like passing. I don't think they have a ton of like good pick and roll ball handlers. Like Luke can do it, on the second unit, but I don't really see him as like a starting caliber pick and roll player when the best defenses are geared up against him. Paul George has gotten better as pick and roll guy, but like it pales in comparison to what Kawhi was doing for this team last year. And so much of their drive and kick game was, based on the fact that like Kawhi was drawing help in the lane and then kicking the ball out, or, drawing help on the pick and roll, and then like Zoo or Serge would pass out of the short roll. So I worry that they're not going to be able to create as many open threes, which was such a big part of their offense, without that offensive hub that Kawhi Leonard was. So I'm interested to see like how their half-court offense functions as a result. Like I think Eric Bledsoe is really good at getting downhill. I think Justise Winslow is very good at getting downhill. But I mean, is it going to create the same amount of openings when they're driving versus like when Kawhi Leonard was driving? I think the answer is pretty clearly no. So the general passing ability and then how that affects their driving kick game is what I'm interested in seeing.
Is that where you would expect the biggest drop-off to come from them, is on offense without Kawhi there? They were 9th in points allowed per possession last year and then 4th in points scored per possession. So there's obviously more room for them to drop off offensively. But Kawhi's also, even regular season Kawhi, still one of the best defenders alive in the NBA. So I think it's probably fair to expect regression perhaps at both ends, but would you be more concerned about them, matching up on offense than defense at this point?
I think Ty Lue is more of an offensive coach. And even in the games when Kawhi and PG were out during the regular season, they still had a system that worked pretty well. Granted, that's different when it's an odd night off for Kawhi versus an entire season off for Kawhi. So I still think that they could be a top 10 offense, but like you said, that gives them more room to drop off just because of the high baseline. I think they were the second best offense in the league a year before that too. So it's a strong offensive ecosystem that's been developed in LA. And I imagine it's still gonna be better than most offenses, but yeah, there's some room to fall off there. Whereas defensively, I think Kawhi Leonard doesn't do as much defensively during the regular season. Like he's still there, and reputation matters quite a bit. But you still got Zubac, you still got like Batum, and as I list this, I'm finding fewer and fewer defenders I actually like on the Clippers roster. So maybe there is room to fall on defense.
They did fine defensively in the minutes. They played like 1,300 possessions without Kawhi and Patrick Beverley, and then Paul George was on the court. And that sample size, they were really good defensively, and they were not so good offensively, if that's like any telltale. But I do, when you go through this roster, though, I don't look at it now and see all these like really great, a bunch of above average defenders. And it's not like Patrick Beverley would have necessarily changed that either. Bledsoe's probably, if he's Milwaukee Bledsoe, he's a better defender than Patrick Beverley probably is.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right about that PG Zubac combination. It's pretty damn good defensively, like as we saw during that conference finals against Phoenix before just like the water like came loose in game 6. But it was hard for the Clippers to score with that lineup. Like I mentioned earlier, Paul George had a hard time getting to the rim with that configuration, but Zoo was great defensively. And if Bledsoe can just mimic what Beverly was doing, which I think is a reasonable expectation, like that's 3 above average defenders at those 3 positions. And then Morris is fine. And Reggie Jackson, like, is suitable, I guess. He was pretty good defensively, I think,
Marcus
in the
Morris
playoffs.
is fine. Reggie Jackson is suitable.
Well, you've got 3 above average. So if you've got, fine and suitable next to that, then I think we're good.
There, there you go. This changes and will, I'm sure, be based in part on how the season actually unfurls for them. But as of right now, who would you view as the most likely player to be traded from this roster before the deadline?
Yeah, you mentioned that this question was coming up, and I still haven't come up with a good answer. Who is most likely to be traded? Well, it's not Paul George. It's not Reggie Jackson, I don't think. I guess Bledsoe, just because I'm not sure if he still fits.
There's no chance we see like them getting scared of paying Terance Mann and trading him.
Oh, no. Worst comes to worst, they get scared of paying Terance Mann. Like, they can just
pick up his team option.
Like, pick up his team option for the 4th year, right? And if Steve Ballmer is getting scared of paying someone, like, that is a big, big problem. That's a really good question. I just don't see him trading like Batum or Zubac because of how cheap good fits they are. I guess like Ibaka, Bledsoe, Morris, like if they needed to package something for like a star, that's sort of the way it works.
I couldn't come up with a good pick for them either. I have, with a question mark next to it, just Luke Kennard, because if for some reason this, like, that's kind of, if he has a good year and that salary is like digestible, do you either trade him for an expiring contract, or does he help you get someone else who fills more of a playmaking need for you? Mm-hmm. I just wouldn't expect anything drastic from them this year, at least until they know what's going on with Kawhi, obviously.
Right.
So this is obviously matchup dependent a ton, but what do you think their most used / most effective crunch time lineup will end up being?
So I think it's going to be like the starters with Batum or Mann in Bledsoe's place. Or if they just go small, then you could have Reggie, PG, Mann, Batum, Morris together.
Is there players? Is there that seems like the most obvious one for them, and it also seems, I don't want to matchup proof, and would be even if you're going to have Zubac as part of the closing lineup, it seems like they're pretty matchup proof when you're looking at closing games, and maybe they, like you said earlier in the podcast, they can always go to Morris at the 5 if they really want to.
Yeah, because you've got the Zubac who can guard traditional centers. I mean, he is good enough to play back to the basket against Ayton or whoever you put at the 5. And then you've got the Morris option if you need to spread a team out like they did against Utah. They even did that during the regular season, actually. That wasn't just a thing that they busted out during the playoffs when they played Utah at full strength in February. That was what they did at the end of the regular season game, and it was just gangbusters. And then Ibaka is sort of like a meet in the middle option where they anticipate him being able to switch. I'm not sure if he can still do that, especially with his recent back surgery, but at least that gives you a stretch option on offense, which gives you sort of that compromise of having a real center defender while also creating more space on the other end.
If you're Ty Lue, what's a weirdo wonky lineup that you're throwing out just to see what happens?
So Giles, Kennard, Winslow, plus any 2 other guys. You can figure out why I'm picking that. But let's see. I kind of just like the idea of 5 wings together. So that closing lineup I mentioned, but in place of Reggie, let's just throw Winslow and see what happens. So Winslow, PG, Batum, Mann, Morris, I think would be just super fun because they're all 6'6" to 6'8", and that's just my dream ideal of basketball. I'm not sure if there's enough playmaking there though. I guess you can put the ball in Mann or Batum's hands and just feel comfortable with it so that Paul George doesn't have to do everything. But yeah, that's where I would go. Just 5 wings. Let's have some fun.
So the lineup I came up with was eerily similar and has even less playmaking because the only player that was different was, instead of Mann, I just have Keon Johnson in there.
Oh, nice.
Let's really go 5 wings and see what happens. I'm a sucker for that type of basketball. I actually don't think that lineup would end well offensively, but I would 100% watch it.
If you just have Winslow throw lobs to Johnson in transition, like let's just more of that. Yeah.
That's fine too. Look, there's the pathway. They're going to be that's a top 10 offensive lineup. So this may surprise you, but their win total over under is not 36.5 like I sent you in the outline. It is, as we record this, 45.5. And would you, as of right now, without knowing for sure what's happening with Kawhi, take the over or under on that?
I think it's a really good line because I have the Clippers sort of pegged as like a top 10 offense, like 10, 11 maybe, and also a top 10 defense. And I was looking at Cleaning the Glass, and the teams that were in like that 10, 11 range last year won 57% of their games, which is 47 wins during the season. So I am just over on that Clippers over under.
I've been picking too many overs on these podcasts, so I think I'm defaulting to the under here. Just Kawhi gives me the excuse.
General optimism, man. It's not such a bad thing.
The other thing here too is I always list like, where do you see them finishing in the West? But there's like 7 or 8 teams. Or if you told me they finished first or second in the West, like I wouldn't be shocked. You tell me that the Clippers finished like 8th or 9th at this point in the West, I also would not be surprised. So is there do you even have a ballpark range for that? Let's say if Kawhi doesn't play at all this year, what would be a realistic position for them to target?
I see them around like 6, 7. I think if they can get out of the play-in, to that 6th, it's probably a successful regular season. But I could also see them jumping as high as 4th. Like hosting a first-round series is not out of the question. Lest we forget, they finished 4th in the Western Conference last year. So can you imagine they have the same number of wins and also a first-round playoff series with a vastly different team?
When you go through it, if you had to pick the teams that are going to be better than the Clippers, I kind of stopped. I went Jazz, Suns, Lakers, and then I didn't feel comfortable putting anyone else in that conversation. Obviously, Denver, I put there if we knew what was happening with Jamal Murray and maybe MPJ is a star, but there are only 3, maybe 4 teams that you could definitively say, and that might even be a stretch. Would you be shocked if they were better than Phoenix this year? I probably wouldn't be. I wouldn't expect
during the regular season. I would be shocked if they were better than Phoenix. Yes. Yeah. Chris Paul is just really good during the regular season, has a way of raising the floor of his teams. They figured out their backup center thing. I think JaVale McGee's going to be fine there. So
did they figure out their backup center thing?
I think so.
My voice is squeaky because I don't think that's
adequate backup center. He was a starting center for the number 1 seed Lakers just 2 years ago. I think he'll be great. He doesn't let them play small the way they were with Dario, but there's enough Thad Young smoke to Phoenix that I'm thinking they could fix that pretty easily.
I really wanted Larry Nance Jr. to end up there. It's clear that they probably wouldn't have had the juice to get that. But yeah, Thad Young's obvious. I'm making fun of them, but they are my pick to come out of the West as of right now. Or reserve the right to change that. DeAndre Ayton said some stuff. It was the other day that was just weird, where he was like, now that I know to play the big man role that I don't like playing, 3-point shooting's the next frontier. So it was the weirdest thing. Maybe he'll explain it. Maybe it was out of context, but it made me worried that is he pissed he didn't get an extension yet? Are we going to see
this
Rose?
This is the kind of media day quote that would have made the rounds had there not been so much vaccination.
It was legitimately bizarre. I had
I'm gonna have to look this up now.
Yeah. I'll link you to it in the DMs once I find it. So is there anyone or anything about this team I did not ask you about? And if you feel obligated to provide an answer for the Toronto Raptors over under, feel free to go with that too.
I haven't given much thought to the Raptors, in truth. I didn't even watch their summer league. I hear good things about Scotty Barnes.
All of Canada.
Yeah. I have been watching the Blue Jays, if that's any consolation for the Canadian fans. Let's see. I think we talked about everyone. We got some PG in there, Reggie, Batum. Marcus Morris shot 47% on threes last year. I believe he was second highest in the league behind Joe Harris. I am of the belief that Marcus Morris is in the downturn of his career. I've heard some compelling arguments that if he's healthy, he should be a potential second scorer for the Clippers. I'm less convinced that he's capable of doing that.
Okay.
I would like to see Marcus Morris become a good rebounder. That I think is a really important swing skill for the Clippers.
It feels like we have almost a decades of evidence that that's probably not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen.
Is there any reason why you think he's on the downturn? Is it just what you saw from him last season?
I just worry about the knees. He didn't have a procedure or anything during the offseason, so it's not like anything was corrected. He just got some rest after the playoffs. He said during media day, which is the time when everyone is at their absolute most optimistic, I'm not 100%. No one is ever 100%. So I don't like to hear that. And
very weird thing to say in
47%
September.
is a lot of threes to make. I don't think 47% is a replicable number. We're on the wrong side of 30 here. I still have just hard and fast rules about the aging curve.
Yeah, look, if the foundation of the argument is I don't think he's going to hit half of his 3-pointers, that's like a very valid stance to take at this point. So can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I cover the Clippers for ClipsNation.com. I am on Twitter at SabrinaJM. And if you're a WNBA fan, I do a YouTube show called The Step Through that is continuing through the playoffs. So you should check that out.
I reiterate, she's a fantastic follow. Follow her at SabrinaJM at SabreenaJM. Thank you as always, Sabrina, for coming on to talk hoops with me. I always enjoy it. And as you have to know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future. So thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BlueWire to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.